Welcome to a three-part series. The Ever-Evolving Truth presents the Unholy Trinity of Cults. In 1993, the United States government engaged in a 51-day standoff with a fringe religious sect led by a megalomaniacal madman named David Koresh. It all ended in a fiery nightmare that would rival any conception of the lake of fire that men of God fear most. We hope you enjoy this DocuCast presentation from the Ever-Evolving Truth.
Welcome, everybody, to the Ever-Evolving Truth. Happy Tuesday. We hope your weekend was great. We lead you into the weekend, and then we take you out from the weekend. And what we're doing here today is the Unholy Trinity of Cults. And to start us off, we have one of the best. Waco, Texas. And we have some people on this panel that are literally obsessed with cults.
That would be me.
Mainly Leah.
But it's just me.
Mainly Leah.
A slightly unhealthy interest. I'll say that at least.
It's more than a slight unhealthy interest. I am fascinated by cult leaders, and I am even more fascinated by members of the cults. Wait until the last one of the Trinity, because I'm too obsessive with that stuff.
So I will just preface this by saying I think that all religion leads to this extremist cult bullshit. But that's a whole different episode. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to bow out here. I'm going to let Leah, Sterner, and Mounts take this over because I will admit I do not know the details of this. I just have opinions on it. So from here on out, it's your show, guys.
Well, I would like to preface this by saying that Leah has done some extensive research on Koresh's early history. Mounts has done some really nice research on the history of the Branch Davidians themselves. So we're going to start with Mounts talking about the history of the organization itself. We're going to throw to Leah, who's going to tell us about early Koresh, including his rise within the Branch Davidians. And then in segment 2, we're going to look at the ATF raid, or the staged raid, depending on who you're asking, which really sparked the 51-day standoff that ended in the massacre of over 80 people, including over 20 children, by fire. So, Mounts, if you could, for anyone that's not intimately familiar with the Branch Davidians or the Waco story, can you start us off with a little bit of a history on who the Branch Davidians are?
Absolutely. I will set the base here for the founding of what eventually became the Branch Davidian. So back in 1929, a gentleman named Victor Houteff, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, Houteff, Houteff, a Bulgarian.
It's Houteff, yeah.
Houteff, all right. He was a Bulgarian immigrant from Southern California. He was a Seventh-day Adventist, and he had gone to the church with a completely brand new message for the Adventist church, and they shut it down. They said it was too extreme. He put that in a book called The Shepherd's Rod, 144,000, A Call for Reformation. When they basically shut him down, he moved his group of followers to the headquarters in Waco, in the west of Waco, Texas, and became known as the Davidians. In 1942, he renamed the group the General Association of Davidian Seventh-day Adventists, which indicated its belief in the restoration of the Davidic kingdom of Israel. When he died, he passed away in 1955. There was a segment of the group which was loyal to him, continued to exist, and that was led by his wife, Florence. Now, Florence pushed that the apocalypse is going to happen in 1959 on a specific date, which she must have just came up with because they couldn't find anything of that in her husband's original writings. So Florence and her council gathered hundreds of their followers at the Mount Carmel Center, the compound, for this prophecy, which was written in Ezekiel. When that didn't occur, and following the disappointment, a gentleman named Benjamin Rodin formed another group, which he called the Branch Davidians, and succeeded in taking control of Mount Carmel. He passed away in 1978, and he was succeeded by his wife, Lois. And now there were members of the Branch Davidian that were torn between an allegiance between Ben's wife and to their son, George. After Lois died, George assumed the right to be the leader of the Branch Davidian. However, this is where a gentleman by the name of Vernon Howell, which most people won't know, I just discovered it in my extensive research. This gentleman, Vernon Howell, came into play. So I don't know if Leah wants to take over.
So Vernon Howell is now infamously known as David Koresh.
And do you know the history of where he came up with that name, Leah?
I do.
Okay, can we start there just on the name itself and then move on to his biography a little bit?
Okay. So David is because of King David. A lot of people have the misconception, it's actually general knowledge, that people think that David Koresh formed the Branch Davidians, and the Branch Davidians are named after him. That is not at all true. Totally separate. He did take it over. So his name is David Koresh, which was after King David from the Old Testament. And he also believed I'm going to get into his early life. This is jumping ahead a little bit. When George took over the Branch Davidians, there was an altercation. Surprisingly enough, David Koresh, or Vernon Howell at that time, was forced out with his following because George came in with guns. Surprise, surprise.
And George believed he had a birthright to the leadership of the Branch Davidians via being Lois's son and the founder's son.
Right. Very much cult. A really good way to look at it is almost like an oligarchy or a monarchy, but also something like the FDLS, which is the fundamentals of Latter-day Saints, which is a branch of Mormons who are polygamists. They believe in a prophet, and that prophet, though it's not always a hereditary thing, usually once that prophet dies, their firstborn son takes over. It's just the way that the succession works in these kind of cults, because it's a really easy way to maintain power if they believe this is a divine line, a divine bloodline. And he had him leave. When David left, he left with his first wife at the time. It's important that I say first because he had many, who was pregnant, and they went to Israel. While in Israel, he was prophesied, I guess you could say. He was told by God that he was King Cyrus and that he was chosen to lead his flock, that he is the Son of God. And that is when he started calling himself David Koresh.
Now, real quick on that, we had talked, if you might remember the name Cyrus from our Forever War episode, where we talked about King Cyrus being the one. I called him mistakenly the Babylonian emperor. He was actually a Persian king.
The king of Persia.
Persia took over Babylonia after Babylonia took over Israel. So he was actually a Persian king, but he was responsible for the building of the second Jewish temple.
Yeah.
And David Koresh believed, Koresh being the translated version of Cyrus, believed that he was there to be reincarnated as Cyrus and have that final messianic kingdom of David on earth that was prophesized, and where all will be right with the world.
Exactly. So I'm going to go back to the beginning, and then we're going to come back again to right around the time where he takes over the Branch Davidians. But from the very beginning, David Wayne Koresh, actually, was born on August 15th, 1959, to his mother, and she was 15 years old at the time. So he was born to a young mother. His mother abandoned him pretty much at 2 years old, and he went to live with his grandparents, who were Seventh-day Adventists. Very strict religious upbringing.
And actually, his young aunt and uncle were almost like brothers and sisters to him, and he was happy there.
Yeah, he was very happy there. He loves his childhood, talks fondly of it. You could see videos, and he really immersed himself in religious belief, in doctrine. He read biblical or religious stories, Christian-based religion material, the way that normal boys watch or read comics. It's the same. That was his thing. He also, when he started school, about when he was in second or third grade, it was discovered that he was put in remedial classes, and his name was Mr. Retardo, is what the kids called him. Today, a lot of people seem to think that he was dyslexic. But back in the early 1960s, dyslexia was not looked at the way it is now.
But he most likely was dyslexic.
Mm-hmm.
He was known as a terrible speller.
Mm-hmm.
And also, for anyone that believes he memorized the Old and New Testament of the Bible.
There, yeah.
Okay, you were getting, so go ahead and speak to it then.
So this is my favorite part of it. When I say that he got his hands on everything, he memorized the Old Testament of the Bible by 10 years old. And by 13 years old, he had the entire book memorized, beginning to end.
Now, if you believe he was dyslexic, though, what are the odds that that is actually true? My guess about that, now I'm not saying it's not true, because I have no way of knowing how he memorized things or how he was able to do what he did.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to believe he became very good at memorizing the parts that needed to be memorized to drive what he was starting to adopt as his worldview. And I think that's what he spit at people without even thinking, so they believe that he had memorized the entire Bible. Look,
Mm-hmm.
I've been through the Bible. You have too, I believe, and you can't. Anybody that can memorize that is like Rain. It would make Rain Man their bitch.
They would. Now, I totally agree with you, Sterner. I think this is one of those messianic things where people say he was so brilliant that he, did this by 10 years old. But I will say, as an aside, one of my children is dyslexic, and their memory is insane. Really good memory. And she also has a really high IQ, which I think, again, is the same thing with David Koresh. David Koresh was not a good student, but he is a brilliant man, a dangerously brilliant man. He was self-taught to play the guitar at 13. He taught himself that, but he also had a stutter. So when he would watch these sermons, he would watch preachers on TV or at his church at the Sabbath, and he would memorize them, what they were saying, and then repeat it the way that the preacher would speak. And he discovered that while he was preaching, he did not stutter. So he believed that was God's light coming into him. He truly believed that that was God speaking through his mouth. So at a very young age, he thought he was a prophet before any of this happened. When he was about 20 years old, he met a young woman who was 15 years old. He dropped out of high school when he was 17 years old. And then when he was between, the dates are a little off, but I saw two different documentaries. Somewhere between that point and when he was about 20, he started dating a girl that was also in his Seventh-day Adventist church and got her pregnant. She was 15 years old. When she got pregnant, her father demanded that they no longer see each other. And David Koresh went to the elders of the church, and he wanted to profess his love for this girl and say that God spoke to him and that God wants them to be married. He was really caught off guard when they told him that that's not what God said. Screw you. She's 15, and her father was an active member in the church. And he kept pushing it to the point where he was excommunicated from the Seventh-day Adventist church. And not only him, his entire family, his grandmother, his mother, his siblings or aunts and uncles, as you want to call them.
Which I'm sure they were not happy about at all.
Not at all.
David Koresh, or at the time Vernon Howell's approach, his probably very combative approach to the church elders, where they basically told him to leave it alone, and he didn't want to leave it alone. So what happened from there?
So he then wanted to find one thing he did with the guitar. I forgot to add this. When he was teaching himself the guitar, he got pretty good. And he kind of has this rock star look, especially in the 80s. If you look up old pictures of him, he looks a little bit like Jim Morrison, just a little more nerdy, like a nerdy Jim Morrison from the Doors.
That's about accurate.
Yeah, he has the long hair and 80s glasses, and he has a look to him. And he was also incredibly charismatic and incredibly charming. And he could play the guitar, and he was decent at it. And he wrote his own music, and he was looking for a place where young people could express their religious beliefs, because it's usually the elders and the Seventh-day Adventists. So between 1980 and 1981, he was told about the Branch Davidians at Mount Carmel. So he and his family,
which Mount Carmel was named after the mountain in northern Israel, but they named areas of Texas Mount Carmel were actually in Waco.
Right, exactly. It's actually in Waco, Texas. A lot of people refer to the compound as Mount Carmel too.
Mm-hmm, right.
Not Mount Carmel, Pennsylvania.
Not Mount Carmel, Pennsylvania. Not that one. So when he gets there, he meets Lois, who was in her late 60s when they met, mid to late 60s. And she invited David Koresh not only to join the Branch Davidians, he charmed her so much that she would let him speak at the pulpit. And he was getting his chance to preach. But there seems to be a little bit of a quid pro quo here, because they were having an affair. Basically, her husband was deceased, so it wasn't really an affair. But David Koresh, who was 20 years old at the time, was having an affair with a 60-some-year-old woman who just so happened to be in charge of the church.
So right there, that is the first thing that he's done that I think out and out shines the light on the fact that he was con man at core.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. That was the first thing I thought too. Clearly he is. And he knew how to manipulate this woman. But she believed in him. She believed that he was a prophet. She really did. So in 1984, 1983, I'm sorry, she said that she was pregnant. She came to the church and said, "It's a miracle and I'm pregnant." She did later miscarry, but it was because of that pregnancy that she thought that God was trying to speak to her through him. Mm-hmm. And she named him as her successor, not her son. Lois then died in 1984. And that was basically when, the shit hit the fan. Let's call it that. So that was when Vernon Howell went to Israel after. So George wanted to take over the Branch Davidians. David Koresh, or Vernon Howell at the time, had his own select group of followers, and so did George. George took some followers with him to Mount Carmel, to the compound, and basically forced them out with guns. He pulled guns on them, and the David Koresh Davidians had to flee, and he was able to take over. George was. The interesting thing there, and this wasn't in the documentaries, this is just me putting, my 2 cents in. I think that might have been the moment where David Koresh went from obsessive zealot to, I'm never going to let this happen to me again. I'm going to take the power. I'm going to win. And that's where all of the kind of Armageddon stuff came in, particularly the guns. He didn't have them at that point, and then this person came in. He knew that's how he took it over. So I wonder there if that's what triggered it, but I can't.
Or if the hook of the apocalyptic vision was how he planned on getting all those people that were even considering following George as the leader, getting them on his side, because he was able to almost hypnotize them into cooperating with his prophecies about the apocalyptic times that were right on top of us.
Right. And I think the other thing too is I think he saw something in that moment too. He saw that George's followers believed in him enough that they would storm a building and hold women and children at gunpoint for him. And I think that was something else that he caught.
So let's talk a little bit real quick. Let's talk a little bit about so George was clearly a loose cannon.
He was.
Violent guy.
Getting right there. Violent guy, loose cannon. David Koresh goes to Israel, or Vernon Howell does, comes back and becomes David Koresh. When he came back, there were still supporters, even some of the George supporters were starting to lead towards David Koresh. David Koresh's appeal, I think, and I am fascinated with cult leaders because I think I'm somebody that could be totally culted. I totally could. I could fall for that kind of shit. But
I thought you were about to say that you could eventually be a cult leader.
I probably could too, because I
said work her way up once she was in it.
Once I'm in it, I'm going to be David Koresh. So, and the Seventh-day Adventists are a sect of Christianity, kind of like the Protestants, except they're a little bit more extreme, and they have a doomsday prophecy. They believe strongly in the book of Revelations, and they believe that they are living in the end times. It is part of their religious doctrine. Okay, it is part of it's a big part of their doctrine, which is important. So Vernon Howell, David Koresh comes back. George is starting to lose control, and he needs to take this guy down. He can't have the competition out there. So he challenges David Koresh to a resurrection off. This is what I'm going to call it. So the Seventh-day Adventists not only believe that don't hold the Sabbath and all that kind of stuff, but one of their crazy ass beliefs is that if you are truly a prophet, you have the ability to resurrect the dead. They believe that a true prophet can do that. So David Koresh is challenged. Write it down. But he dug up the body of a woman who had died and was about 72 years old, I believe, and had been dead for a few years.
And this was going to be the target of their resurrection off, that whoever could resuscitate her first would be the true leader. And this is where old George dumbed his way out of being a cult leader.
He absolutely dumbed his way out of it. And this is what shows you that David Koresh is a smart ass guy, because instead of actually falling into this trap, because like I said, David Koresh was smart and he knew he couldn't be, it
wasn't a wizard.
Yeah, he wasn't a wizard. He knows he's not actually God, right? Like he knows that. It was delusional. But instead of competing with this guy, he went to the cops. And he told the police that this guy has been digging up bodies and he's trying to resurrect them and blah, blah, blah. Long story short, George gets committed to a prison for or a hospital for the mentally insane, criminally insane. And David Koresh is now the leader of the Branch Davidians.
Well, that was a great history, you guys, as far as how Koresh got there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny. Now, we have about 5 minutes left in this segment, Leah. Do you want to talk about, I don't want to call it the happier times, but do you want to talk about the early days of Koresh? Even if you don't have it in your notes, just your impressions about the earliest days of Koresh's leadership of the Branch Davidians, and when they started to get right to the point where they were making enough noise that they became problematic.
Okay. So this area in Texas, Mount Carmel, is not, it's a big open space if you've ever seen it, but it's not, completely isolated. They did have quote unquote neighbors, and they saw people around town. These weren't people that were held in houses. And David Koresh, like I said, was really smart. And when he first took over, the one way he won over Lois too is he called himself the sinful Messiah. And I found that to be so interesting because, prophets and God are supposed, and Jesus especially, they don't sin. They're not sinners, not true sinners. And this is why David Koresh thought that he was better than Jesus and made other people believe that he was more important and better than Jesus, because
just that he might have been as significant a figure as Jesus. He just happened to come in the form of
David Koresh,
a sinful Messiah, that not the pure Son of God, because I think he believes that Christ allowed himself to I almost heard at one point that I think he believed that Christ allowed himself to be a sinner at the very end. That might have been his interpretation of it, but he certainly believed himself to be, what a great excuse. You're not only the Messiah, but you can do whatever you want.
Which is beautiful. So it's brilliant, and it works too. Like something like that would work on me. His belief and his mantra was like, only a sinner can judge another sinner. Like Jesus wasn't born with original sin. I was, and I've sinned my whole life. So I get you. We're the same. I understand it. And at one point I found this to be incredibly interesting. The Seventh-day Adventists are conservatives, extreme Christian conservatives. So to hear this guy get up there with his rock star kind of good looks a little bit and his avant-garde way of preaching, it set them back, but it also led to people being like, it's the Trump factor. It's the Trump factor. He spoke their language. He spoke honesty. He didn't speak down to them. He got on their level, but still kept himself high enough so he was the God. But it's okay. You can sin. I sin too. That's what we're supposed to do. And he compared sinning to picking your nose and having a booger that you just can't get off your skin. That's the kind of...
Yeah, that was an actual line from one of his sermons.
Yes, it was. It was an actual line from one of the sermons, which really stuck with me. I found that to be just so interesting. So he thought he was better than Christ, and he slowly, it was slow, but one of the first things he did was separate the husbands and wives. So if you were married, the women belonged to David Koresh. And David Koresh preached, and I truly believed that he believed that the women there were there to be the vessel for the Son of God.
And that he was supposed to have a very specific number of children. I believe it was, 26?
26 children.
Right, and that was prophesied in the Bible according to Koresh. And he considered also that he was, the Seventh-day Adventists and the Book of Revelation doomsday picture.
Mm-hmm.
Koresh sold himself as the Lamb of God figure in the Revelation story, who was the only one that could define the seven seals that are described in the Book of Revelation. And therefore, that special knowledge could only come from him. He could not be denied as the prophet, which meant that the wives of these cult members that he took as his own wives, his own concubines, that they basically were doing God's work by giving birth to God's children, as you said, Leah, and the husbands were expected to remain celibate, and they agreed to all this and lived happily.
They did. They agreed to all it. And not only did he marry these men's wives, he started to marry their daughters.
And we're actually gonna get to that in the next segment because we do have to take a break now. But that's gonna actually lead eventually to the ATF raid that we're gonna talk about in the second segment. So let's pause there, and then we'll come back and talk about the wives and the daughters and the ATF. Welcome back to the first in the 3-show edition of the Unholy Trinity of Cults. We are talking about Waco, Texas, the Branch Davidians, and one David Koresh. Mounts and Leah provided a really nice, succinct history of the organization and the man. And we were just about to discuss the fact that in addition to all the wives that Koresh took for himself, which were the wives of his own, let's just call them his congregation of the Branch Davidians at this point, even though it was very cult. It was a cult for all intents and purposes, but they didn't consider.
Just as a quick aside, one of the women interviewed in one of the documentaries I saw said, "We knew we were in a cult. We said it.
Right.
We admitted it. We didn't care."
But yet Koresh took umbrage to that term. He said, "I'm not a cult leader. I'm a messenger," and also that there were plenty of the Branch Davidians that really believed David Koresh to be a Messiah. In fact, in the documentaries I was watching today, which was Messiah or Madman,
great one.
That was a very good film, and there were people, the ex-Branch Davidians, who still today believe that Koresh was the Messiah.
Absolutely.
And the other film that we researched for this was called Waco: Rules of Engagement. Now, the reason I bring that film up is because Leah was talking about Koresh and his tastes for the carnal pleasures of life led him to behave badly. And in addition to shacking up with as many of the wives of his congregation that he could get to shack up with him, and he eventually fathered 15 of his hoped-for 26 children that he was eventually going to have, he started getting a taste for the young ones.
He was also the step-grandfather and father to a lot of those kids, which is super icky. Like, when you think about that,
Some children were born at Mount Carmel, and they lived their entire lives at Mount Carmel until the disastrous end, the fiery end. So as that was going on, we have to skip a little bit here because of time constraints. But this is what started to attract the kind of attention that was not good, that this guy was out there with people thinking he was Christ, and he's sleeping with minors, reportedly, although he denied that. And there were other people in the congregation who denied that it happened. Even one of the accuser's mothers denied it, but she was an indoctrinated cult member, so she's not really a very reliable witness.
But there is proof. There is one girl that had a child at 16. And it's
was fathered by David Koresh.
So she claims. Like, I don't know if the DNA proves it, but yes, she was 16.
Now, what I think is that Koresh started to get on the government's radar, not because of that, although that is eventually what was used, partially what was used. But I think he got on the government's radar because Koresh was smart enough to figure out different ways to make money. One of the ways that he decided to make money, Leah spoke earlier about how he saw how George controlled people with his violence and his weapons. So Koresh and the Branch Davidians started to stockpile weapons at Mount Carmel. And they would go and they would sell these weapons at gun shows, and on the profit they made, they would fund the running of the Branch Davidian cult. And eventually this caught the ire of the government that felt, okay, here we got this guy out in the middle of nowhere in the Texas prairie who believes he's Christ, and he's got a whole following of people. And he's starting to stockpile weapons.
Yeah.
So the government decided that Koresh was on the bad boy list.
Actually, before you do that, what actually did tip people off, the local authorities were getting calls about the weapons, the people that knew about the guns. But David Koresh had ordered a box of grenades. And when the UPS man came to drop it off, it opened and the grenades spilled out, like the box ripped. He then reported it to the ATF. So it was that box of grenades, because he had been delivering so many things to that house from that same address, they started to realize that there's an issue with this guy ordering weapons. I just wanted to have that. Go ahead.
Right. No, that's important.
Yeah.
So, now the ATF now decided that Koresh was a problem, so they actually sent an undercover agent named Robert Rodriguez in to basically infiltrate the Branch Davidians and be their inside informant, so they could figure out what to do next. And of course, with a dedicated host of followers, the smart play would have been to catch this guy by surprise. Right? Because if you catch the whole group by surprise, you're not going to have a bunch of people trying to defend him. You're going to get to Koresh easier. It's going to catch him off guard, and you can take him out. Now, why in the world they did not arrest Koresh while he went into town on his supply runs is beyond me. Why you didn't just cut off the head of the snake, figuratively, by nabbing Koresh while he was in town making pickups is beyond me, because what eventually happened was much, much, much worse. So the ATF actually used this idea of the sex with minors. This was given as a partial reason why they were going in to arrest Koresh, in addition to the weapons, which led something else. Right, which led some people to believe the ATF didn't have jurisdiction over such a crime. So why in the world was the ATF the operating body that was carrying out this supposed raid? Agreed. What I think it was, and I might be wrong, but my surmising of the situation is this: they were hoping, they wanted it to be a raid. They wanted a violent conflict to occur, because what they wanted was, I believe, a campaign against the proliferation of this crazy amount of gun ownership, the ability to traffic in guns and everything else. And they were hoping that by presenting the horror of this cult leader in the middle of the prairie with followers and stockpiles of weapons turning into a violent conflict with the ATF would probably scare people into supporting either greater funding for the organization of the ATF or to support the gun, the opposition to the gun lobby, and get power on the left. And if you watch in Waco, the Rules of Engagement, look what a boo-boo face Chuck Schumer's wearing as he disgustedly asks his questions and makes his comment. Look at the feigned outrage that President Biden, then Senator Joe Biden in his late 40s, declaratively saying, the Branch Davidians killed themselves. The government did not do this. In the same way that today he'll say, this is not who we are. America is not this. It's this. In that same amount of conviction, he basically denied all responsibility the government had for the disaster we ended up with in the final explosion of this whole conflict. But that's why I think they were hoping to have this play out as a violent conflict, because not only did they have all the opportunity in the world to grab Koresh on his supply runs, Robert Rodriguez, the informant, actually told them that someone from the news had tipped off a Branch Davidian, because the news was on the way to cover whatever the ATF raid was going to be.
Again,
right? You have something on that, Leah?
Another thing. So I'm sorry. What was his name? I can't look through my notes.
Robert Rodriguez?
Robert Rodriguez was a undercover ATF agent who actually lived with the Branch Davidians for, I believe it was about 6 months. He had joined the cult and was as far as David Koresh knew, an active member. And that day, somebody came in the day of or day before, I'm not sure which it was. Someone came into the room and threw down a paper that said, the simple Messiah got mad, or something like that. And it was then that David Koresh was like, he looked at Rodriguez and said, I know who you are, and tell your people I know they're coming. Rodriguez, his cover was blown. Right then, they should have just backed off. He knew,
because the element of surprise was completely gone, and now you were almost guaranteed a violent conflict.
And you're being told by your own fellow, brother in arms, or whatever they call themselves, that that he knows. You've lost your element of surprise. Do not do this. There are women and children in that room, that building. And that's what Rodriguez told them. They ignored him at every turn.
Now, Rodriguez has actually come out in 1995. They had congressional hearings around everything that happened at Waco. And Rodriguez said that the agents that he communicated to and said, call it off. Our cover's blown. The element of surprise is lost. Call it off. They know. That plea was ignored. Now they claim it was just too late. It was all the raid was already moving forward. Rodriguez has gone on oath and said that is a complete lie and it's a cover up, and they wanted it to go the way that it went. So long story short, eventually the ATF gets up there to the compound at Mount Carmel, right? And there's dozens and dozens and dozens of the Branch Davidians in there. And we don't know who shot first. There's a lot of people saying a lot of different things about who shot first, that the Branch Davidians shot out the door, or that the ATF was shooting and the Branch Davidians defend themselves. I don't know who shot first, but what I do know is that a Branch Davidian named Wayne Knight, Wayne Martin, not Wayne Knight. That's the guy from Seinfeld. Wayne Martin actually called 911 and begged them to send somebody out there to call them off. He said, we got women and children under here. We're getting fired upon. Tell them to call it off. They were, the Branch Davidians were terrified in there. They absolutely were. But in this violent conflict, 4 ATF agents were shot to death and 6 Branch Davidians were killed. A multiple of others were injured on the ATF side. Now, and
on the Branch Davidian side, there were some injuries from that first.
Definitely injuries on that side too. So what happened? Okay, so now as we prepare to go to our next break in the next 2 minutes here, think about it. So now you got the guy in the middle of the prairie saying he's Jesus, and he's got a dangerous amount of followers. There seems to be a concubine situation with minors. And now ATF agents of the federal government are dead. So you can imagine what the federal government is starting to think about as far as the solution to this problem. Well, now we're in basically a very bad situation, because this is where the standoff begins. The Branch Davidians don't want to leave. They want to be left alone to live the way that they want to live and to worship the way they want to worship.
They're right in this country.
The ATF and the FBI now say, look, you've crossed a line that you can't uncross. Our guys are dead. You're out here running a cult in the middle of Texas, and you're dangerous. And now people are dead. So for the next 51 days, we had a standoff where the FBI came in and took jurisdiction over the situation and negotiated with Koresh, with Steve Schneider, who was his kind of like
his second in command.
Yeah, second in command. He also, by the way, was fathered a child with Steve Schneider's wife, and filmed interviews with that woman and her child while Steve Schneider filmed it. Talk about the ultimate cuck move.
Is that the one where that's the one where he's already shot, right? He's sitting in the room.
He's sitting there on the floor with a bad hip.
Yeah,
and he's got a bullet hole. Koresh has got a hole in his oblique, and that went out his side. So he's basically sitting on his ass because he can't get up. And he's still doing these films. So eventually, during the negotiation process, the FBI sent cameras in and had the Branch Davidians film videos of themselves telling their story, telling why they were there, that they were there of their own will, that what they wanted, blah, 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 blah. And they had plenty of back and forth communication with Koresh and Schneider. So as we see here, 51 days have gone by. We're going to talk about what happened during those 51 days in the third segment, but we're going to break just a minute or two early now so we can make sure we give that third segment its full treatment and you get a full scope of the absolute nightmare that became of the Branch Davidians and the Mount Carmel compound. Before we break, anybody have anything else on the ATF raid? Any points of information you want to point out there, or have we given it a pretty good overview?
I think we gave it a good overview, but real quick with the Rodriguez thing, to me, it's hard. This is the sole reason why it's hard for me to believe anything other than the ATF wanted exactly, and the FBI wanted exactly what happened to have happened. Because I don't care, even if, let's say that it isn't a lie and that Rodriguez contacted them and they were on their way. There were no shots fired yet. They weren't outside of the building yet. You could have stopped.
Yes.
And they didn't.
They should have. The ATF should have never come in like that. They should have never been ready to go to a violent conflict, which leads me to believe that's what they wanted.
Exactly.
And I'll get into it in the third segment, how I felt they should have even handled it at the time of the massacre, how they should have handled that as well.
They could have handled it better.
We'll touch on that.
Didn't the ATF say that there was no shots fired, period?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, no. They
On
said
their
the Branch
side.
Davidian. No, they said the Branch Davidians shot first, and they returned fire.
Yeah.
In the final massacre, they say the FBI never fired one bullet,
round,
which is a bald-faced lie based on the later video that came out.
Yeah, you could see it. You see them shooting, but
Right. So that's what the ATF said, that they were not the aggressors, that the Davidians shot first. They were only returning fire. From the sounds behind Wayne Martin on that 911 call where he's begging for their lives, I would beg to differ who might have been the aggressor in that particular conflict. But
it's interesting how against religion and cults I am, but how this sounds just like, these guys weren't hurting anybody. Just leave them alone.
And you could make that
you know what I
argument.
mean?
You could make that argument to a large degree. Even the weapons, like it's not illegal to own guns. It's not illegal to sell guns and all that. If he was having sex with minors, that would have been a reason why Koresh might have had to go.
Totally.
But the Davidians living the way they lived, there's supposed to be freedom of religion in this country. And what happened here was one of the grossest examples of the United States abandoning a lot of those rules and massacring with extreme prejudice the entire group of them, whether accidental or not.
Right. I mean, the real question is, were children in danger before any of this happened?
No, I don't think so. Well, yes and no. I think we'll get into that. Yes, in a way, because when they're in a cult, and 2, they're being brainwashed, and 3, if you're a girl, you're probably going to end up, married to this Messiah.
Great point. Yeah, it's a great point.
But
they used that.
Does that warrant like force? I
don't think they gave a shit that Koresh was sleeping with the minors. They used that as it's for some chum in the water, so they could justify their aggressive tactic for the larger agenda that I believe they had. But we'll get into that in segment 3. So don't you go away. We'll be right back with the final segment of the Unholy Trinity of Cults, show number 1, Waco and the Branch Davidians. Welcome back to the final segment in the first show of our Unholy Trinity of Cults series. And we are rounding out the Waco, Texas Branch Davidian story and the final end of David Koresh and all of his followers, a very fiery, violent end, a massacre to say the least. So before we get into that day, the day of the destruction of the Branch Davidians, it's important to remember that before the events of April 19th, which is when that massacre took place, there were 51 days of a siege. Mm-hmm. During that time, there was extensive negotiations between the FBI negotiating team, which, as Mounts pointed out in one of our breaks here, was a lot different apparently than the decision makers at the level of Attorney General Janet Reno and the Washington, D.C. side of the FBI. The tactical teams were running on different marching orders during this whole thing than the negotiating teams were. The negotiators were looking to the final end for a solution, and they were basically being told as of April 19th that, okay, we're done talking. We're done with this whole situation. Get the fuck out of here, or we're coming in. Okay? And that's what it eventually led up to. But during that time, a couple of interesting things happened. Now, again, we got to go high level just due to time constraints, but the FBI tactical team that was on site was driving tanks around the perimeter of the property. They were driving over cars. They were destroying brush. They were even, when the ATF showed up, they were even shooting dogs. But at night, when the Branch Davidians were trying to sleep, they would shine these huge diesel-powered generated lights into the windows of the Branch Davidian compound, and they would play Nancy Sinatra singing "These Boots Were Made for Walking," and they were playing the sounds of animals, rabbits being slaughtered, and cocks crowing.
Hold on real quick there, people. I want you to think about it. In other countries, and even in ours, that is torture. It is a torture tactic. They tortured an American governing body tortured their own citizens. Think about that.
They were trying to drive them crazy and get them to leave. They were trying to disturb their sleep to the point where they were going to get so unhappy in there that eventually the hope was that they would leave.
Give up early, yeah.
So now for Koresh's part, Koresh was talking to the FBI
a lot.
Pretty frequently, yeah. And even after the ATF raid, one of the negotiators, what was his name again, Mounts? Nosner? Gary Nosner?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
He was the main negotiator who was talking, but one of the negotiators told Koresh at one point that no helicopters fired. Well, they knew that wasn't true because one of their members who was doing something from for the maintenance of the compound itself in one of the silos on the property actually climbed up to see what was going on and was shot from above by one of the helicopters that was surrounding and flying around the area during the ATF raid. Yeah. And then they were claiming that didn't happen, and Koresh got very agitated and was arguing with them that clearly it did happen. Then the negotiator pulled that back slightly and said, "Oh, no, I meant there were no mounted guns on those helicopters. I'm not saying no one fired from them." Koresh at one point said that he would leave, that he didn't want to do this anymore, and he was not a cult leader, and he just wanted to get his message out. So if the FBI would agree to play his message over the radio so the entire world, because this had become a national story. Bill Clinton was talking about this on television, saying that David Koresh was unhinged.
And Janet Reno, who was his why did that just leave my mind? Fucking A, what was Janet Reno?
Well, she was the Attorney General at the
time.
Thank
you. She was the Attorney General at the time, and she is the reason that the FBI did eventually do what they did at the end. She encouraged them to do it because she wanted this to end. She didn't like the way it looked.
Well, but Janet Reno, of course, claims ignorance about the fact that Koresh was willing to come out if they let him finish the Seven Seals testimony and release that he would come out once that was complete. She basically claimed ignorance. She was never told that. She was also never told a couple of other important things. She was informed that they felt that if this kept going on, they were going to start abusing the children, which led her to also say, no, we got to go in there and get this done. So also, we spoke about Koresh and the Seven Seals. Once they agreed to have his message played across the radio and on television, he then claimed again, no, God has spoken to me again, and now I have to stay here. I've been told to wait. So now they're thinking, this guy's never coming out of there. Okay, he thinks he's Jesus Christ. He's a megalomaniacal madman, and he's got these followers that he wants to keep, and now he has no way out of the situation. If he stays in, he at least gets to continue to reign as the Christ-like leader of this cult. And if he leaves, he knows as soon as he walks out of there, they're either blowing his head off or they're taking him right to jail. So Koresh, they're at this point thinking Koresh is never going to leave. Now, before we get into what actually occurred, I have a question for you guys. After all the material you've seen, ask me this, or explain to me this. You got 80 people in there tops, right? 80 to 90 people in there tops, right? Including children. Why in the world did they not dispatch enough men, the most overkill force of men you could possibly get with riot gear on, and put them into a formulation of waves of force? Send one wave in and then another. The first wave that went in should not have been blasting at all. They should have busted in. Their first objective should have been take down any adult man you see and compromise him, neutralize him, right? The next wave that came in should have taken down the rest of the adult men that were still able-bodied and maybe even aggressively brandishing weapons, etc. Then the next wave of people in should have been to compromise all the adult women that were there that could have done damage to them and bodily harm.
Right.
And the next wave should have gotten the rest of the adult women. And then they should have come in and made sure that the children were neutralized. At that point, you can take as long as you want to get to Koresh. You can lead him out of there in chains. And this whole thing would not have turned out the way it did. Now, would there have been gunfire from the Branch Davidians? Very possibly, yes, especially if they knew you were coming to take their savior. But the amount of risk involved in that and the amount of people that were going to be harmed, even in that scenario, would have been much less than even if their eventual plan was only to gas the Davidians.
Right.
It would have been a much less torturous way for them to act and for them to conduct themselves. And tell me, do you believe they couldn't have got Koresh that way?
I don't know. So I'm torn. Could they have gotten Koresh that way?
By sheer numbers alone.
By sheer numbers alone, I think they could have. Absolutely.
Like let's say there was 400 troops ready to go into this place.
Mm-hmm.
They could have taken Koresh out with almost no fatalities. Some of them might have got shot, but that's why I say they should have been wearing riot gear. But some of them might have got shot by the Davidians. If they went in there with the idea that they were not going to shoot or hurt anyone, they could have got out of this with very little life lost. Now, could the Branch Davidians have set fire to the whole place at that point and made the place explode? Yes. Could they have returned fire? Yes. But I still think that tactic would have been so much better as a first attempt to get the Davidians out of there and Koresh into custody.
If they had led with that and it still ended the way it ended, I think Americans would be a lot more comfortable.
Absolutely, they would.
With what had happened at Waco, Texas. If they had done something like that, that is not what happened at all. Could they have gotten Koresh? I don't know. Part of me thinks that he knew he was going to die and he wanted to. However, David Koresh is not a crazy suicidal maniac or homicidal like Manson or Jim Jones. He's not like that. So I don't know. Arguably. He doesn't seem that way anyway to me. I don't know if he would have killed himself if it, got too close for comfort. And I still don't know if he did. We'll get there, but
the official FBI stance on it is that his second in command, Schneider, killed Koresh by gunshot and then turned the gun on himself in a murder-suicide. That's their official surmising.
That's their official surmising, but it's still, there's been no proof for that. They can't.
Yeah, they don't know for sure.
They don't know if in the bullet doesn't necessarily match the gun.
Well, when you have a massacre like this, you don't know what bullet came from where, whatever. Right. So, there's no official word on that. So real quick, just so you guys have this as general knowledge, and then we're going to go do a timeline of the actual FBI raid starting on April 19th. So remember, Koresh has said, put my message out on the radio, I'll come out. Then he said, I'll explain the 7 seals. And once I get that done and I'm ready to present that to the world, I'll lead the Davidians out and we'll surrender. Well, okay. The problem with that was no one told Janet Reno about the 7 seals arrangement or the agreement, or she pretended not to know. I tend to believe the second thing.
I'm a little unsure. I think it's possible that they didn't tell her everything if they wanted it to go the way it did. But who's going to lie to the attorney general and
at that point, when the government has done something so egregious that you're about to hear here, you had in the end Biden's lying his ass off about it, Schumer's lying his ass off about it, Reno's lying her ass off about it. In my opinion,
to this day,
because they have to. They have to defend the integrity of the United States government. We overreached so badly on this deal that it was one of the worst. It was one of the worst instances of us being a tyrannical bully government in the history of our nation. Remember, after what I'm about to tell you, after this happened, the flag of Israel flew outside the compound of the Branch Davidians. Guess what flag was flown at the end of this conflict? Leah, do you remember? It was the flag of the ATF. That's the flag they raised after all this was done. They raised the flag of the ATF. What does that tell you?
Ultimate icky move. I mean, at least it was tacky and disgusting. At worst, it is a clear-cut sign of we won. We don't care. We slaughtered you. Conquerors. They're conquerors. That's what they felt like. Yes,
you're right. And they got them back. They got revenge. So before I go into this brief timeline here, I also want, it's important to remember that the FBI's official claim is they never fired one bullet at the compound during what I'm about to describe.
At all. Okay. Not one.
Not one. All right. So here's the timeline. This was April 19th, a little bit before 6 in the morning. Here's what happened. The FBI moves in. We're talking tanks, helicopters. To look at the video of this is absolutely horrifying. It looks like something out of a dystopian movie or something out of some third world war torn country. 5:50 a.m.
I thought I was watching a Vietnam movie, honestly.
It does feel like that, yeah. So at 5:50 a.m., agents call the Branch Davidian compound, warn they're going to begin tank activity. They advise residents to take cover. All this, by the way, comes from the book A Fire That Won't Die by Daniel Klaidman. I'm sorry, it was a Newsweek piece, not a book, but it was called The Fire That Won't Die by Daniel Klaidman. Agents say the Branch Davidian who answered the door did not reply, but instead threw the phone and phone line out the front door. 5:55 a.m., the FBI hostage rescue team deployed 2 armored CEVs to the building. CEV-1 goes to the left of the building, CEV-2 to the right. Those are the tanks. FBI surveillance tapes at 6 a.m. from devices planted in the wall of the building record a man inside the compound saying, "Everybody wake up, let's start to pray." Then, "Pablo, have you poured it yet? Huh? Have you poured it yet?" In the hallway. Things are poured, right? CEV-1 receives orders to spray 2 bottles of tear gas into the left corner of the building. 6:05 a.m., armored vehicle with ram and delivery device to pump tear gas into the building with pressurized air rips into the front wall just left of the front door, leaving a hole 8 feet high and 10 foot wide. Okay, did you need that much space to insert your tear gas? Agents claim the holes allowed insertion of the gas as well as provided a means of escape. Agents see shots from inside the compound directed at the tanks. 6:10, FBI surveillance tapes record, "Don't pour it all out. We might need some later," and throw the tear gas back out. Excuse me. FBI negotiator Byron Sage is recorded saying, "It's time for people to come out." Surveillance tapes record a man saying, "What?" and then, "No way." 6:12, FBI surveillance tapes record Branch Davidians saying, "They're going to kill us." Then, "They don't want to kill us." 6:31, the entire building is gassed. And just to give you a little bit of color on that, in boot camp, the soldiers are required to have some very limited, we're talking seconds, exposure to this CS gas or light gas that is meant to really irritate the sinuses, the inner membranes, the eyes. It burns like a mother, and it's torturous to go through. In boot camp, they make you go through it for a few seconds. The Branch Davidians were gassed for 6 hours, and the children could not wear gas masks because their heads were too small for the gas masks. So this was the torturing for 6 hours, the slow torture of the people inside. Now, the FBI's hope, the stated hope, was that the parents inside would have such empathy kick in for the suffering of their children that they would force their way out and say, "Okay, we've had enough. I don't care what Koresh says. I'm saving my kids." That clearly didn't happen, and they didn't leave. And that shows you what an evil motherfucker Koresh was in the end, that he had that kind of hold on them, and they refused to leave in spite of being tortured. So now at 6:47, the FBI hostage rescue team fires plastic non-incendiary tear gas rounds through the windows. FBI surveillance tapes record a male Branch Davidian saying, "The fuel has to go all around to get started." Then a second male says, "Well, there are 2 cans here if that's poured soon." Okay. Skipping over a little bit here. 8:08. 3 pyrotechnic military tear gas rounds are shot at the concrete construction pit, not the concrete bunker where the women and children were hiding. That comes into effect later. And downwind from the main quarters, trying to penetrate the structure, but they bounce off. The concrete bunker that was talked about, that's where the women and children were hiding to get away from this onslaught, this ongoing onslaught of being gassed. And there was no ventilation in this room. It was essentially a basement. It was a bunker type concrete structure. There's no ventilation in something like that, and they gassed the fuck out of them. So the women and children got it the worst of all of anyone that was gassed, and they were basically in an airtight hole when they were gassed. Think about that suffering. Okay, so now at 9 o'clock, the Branch Davidians unfurl a banner out the window that says, "We want our phone fixed." 9:13, CV-1 breaks through the front door to deliver more gas. FBI surveillance records a meeting at 7:30 a.m. between several unidentified male. Here's the dialogue. They got 2 cans of Coleman fuel down there, right? Huh? The next person says empty. Next person, all of it? Next person, nothing left. 10 o'clock, a man is seen waving a white flag on the southeast side of the compound. He's advised over the loudspeakers that he is surrendering, that if he is surrendering, he should come out. He does not. At the same time, a man believed to be Schneider, the second in command, comes out from the remains of the front door to retrieve a phone and phone line. The initial CEV-2 tank has mechanical difficulties, damaged tread. its replacement breaches through the backside of the compound. Some believe that tank was damaged by running over one of the Branch Davidian members.
Right. Ugh.
Okay, so 1117 to 1204, according to the government, remember that, a series of remarks such as, I want a fire, keep that fire going, and do you think I should like this soon, indicate that the Branch Davidians have started setting fire to the complex around 1130. Surviving Branch Davidians testified that Coleman fuel had been poured, and fire experts in Danforth's report agree, without question, that people inside the complex had started multiple accelerated fires. Also, Branch Davidian survivor Graham Leonard Craddock, an Australian national who was convicted of possessing a grenade and or using and possessing a firearm during a crime, did a bit of jail time. He says he personally heard the Davidians, and he says also Koresh saying start the fire. All right, so that's important. It is very possible Koresh was commanding them to burn the place down from inside. That does not excuse or make okay what the FBI did here by any stretch. 1143, another gas insertion takes place. The FBI hostage rescue teams believe the Branch Davidians are trying to avoid the gas. The wall on the right side of the building collapses 15 minutes before noon. An armored vehicle turret knocks away the first floor corner on the right side. By 1207, the first visible flames appear in two spots in the front of the building. First on the left of the front door on the second floor, a wisp of smoke, then a small flicker of flame. And the fires begin to run at that point. Ruth Riddle, the Branch Davidian member, exits the compound with a floppy disk in her jacket containing Koresh's first manuscript on the Seven Seals. This, remember, was what he offered if they accepted it and distributed it and let him finish it at least, that he would come out peacefully. And to prove that he was working on it and this was actually in process, Ruth Riddle exits with that floppy disk containing the manuscript. So that right there indicates Koresh was at least telling the truth about wanting time to finish that, whether he ever intended on coming out. Mm-hmm. All right, so real quick with the rest of this, also the Waco Fire Department trucks were never dispatched, and the reason given for that was that they were never dispatched during this massacre part to treat the fires because they did not want to endanger the fire personnel because of all the firing that was happening. All the bullets that were going back and forth, it was considered an unnecessary risk to do that. So you had no one fighting these fires while people were dying in them.
There's fires with children in that building, and they don't take the risk. That is disgusting. It's appalling.
At 12:25, there's a large explosion on the left side of the compound. One object hurtles in the air, bounces off the top of the bus, and lands on the grass. 12:30, part of the roof collapses. Around this time, there's several further explosions, and witnesses report the sound of gunfire attributed to the FBI hostage rescue team to live ammunition cooking off throughout the buildings because of the fire. 12:43, according to fire department logs, fire trucks finally arrive at the compound. Fire begins to burn out at 12:55. The entire compound is leveled, and at 3:45 in the afternoon, a law enforcement source states that David Koresh is dead.
Wow.
Whew. All right, so that's the timeline.
But that's the FBI's version of the timeline. That is not it. Let's be clear here. That is not necessarily factual. It is definitely written in a way, I feel, to make them sound innocent.
Well, I think at the very least, before we get to the final assessment of the FBI and Koresh, Leah, talk about a surveillance plane that actually shot video from beneath itself onto the Branch Davidian compound, Mount Carmel. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about some of the shit that they caught on video, which it's like a nightmare movie. It's crazy. Mm-hmm. But can you talk a little bit about some of the things that were on that tape?
I actually am not positive everything that was on the tape. There is you do see agents clearly shooting. You see at one point, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, where one of the fires are, you actually see agents running from it, and then the flames start.
So the big thing was that the front of the Mount Carmel compound was where what the media could see. The back was hidden from public view completely. that is where the tank, one of the tanks came in and literally leveled the shit out of the compound through a gymnasium. Most likely ran over several Branch Davidians, and there was muzzle flashes from all over the place that were machine gun muzzle flashes. There are flashes of fire being executed from the tank itself. All of that took place in the back of the compound on this surveillance video, which had special technology. Even though this happened during the day, this was a very special video that was able to pick up only things from the way that it registered things on its film was how hot they were. And later on, this video becomes extremely important.
Extremely.
Because 2 years after all this, they do congressional investigations about what happened, because clearly it was Wags mentioned it's called a thermal imaging camera was what they took the pictures with. Well, what they did know was what appeared as muzzle flashes from machine guns and firing from tanks could not have been anything else because of the heat generated from them and the briefness of the display of those flashes. That said that this couldn't have been something else from nature. This wasn't reflection from the sun, which the FBI tried to claim at one point, one of their experts, that these were actual fires being generated by the FBI firing on the compound. All right, they were being extremely aggressive. They wanted to destroy and take out Koresh no matter who died in the process. Now, did they actually purposely start fires inside? I'm not willing to go so far as to say I believe that. I think it's very possible the Davidians themselves set those fires, and also that fires were a result of the firing from the FBI on the compound, mixed with the unbelievable inches and inches of the CS gas residue that was all over everything as though it was volcanic ash. Do you know what a incredible powder keg, like a spark waiting to go off, that was? And then because of the fact that they punched holes through the buildings on all these sides, you got all that strong wind in the Texas prairie now blowing through that building like crazy, and accelerant. Talk about a situation that was waiting to explode, literally.
Yeah, literally.
The FBI created that situation. So whether the Branch Davidians
I don't think
took themselves out, as Biden says, for Biden to say in the 95 hearings that the government did not do this, motherfucker, the government had way, way, way too much to do with this, and they handled it in the worst way they possibly could have, in my opinion. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
Okay, totally agree with you. And I am also of the firm belief that the Branch Davidians did not set any of the fires. I believe it was, I've heard that theory before, and it's the only one that makes sense to me. And here's why.
Well, the reason I tend to believe it is because of the testimony of this Davidian that was convicted, that escaped. The guy called Graham Craddock, the Australian. He actually says he heard it with his own ears. That's what made me start to believe there's probably some truth to that. But go ahead.
Yeah. So, and my reasoning is not actually anything there. It's more based around the cult aspect of it. So, like I said, I'm obsessed with cults, and when a cult leader does make somebody his congregate but when there is a mass suicide or mass murder situation, like with the Manson family, or suicide like Jonestown, or Heaven's Gate, these people, it's a prepared process. They would all be together in solidarity. They're usually laying right next to each other in a perfect line with some kind of, it's not. So followers, if they're going to kill themselves, if they were going to, burn themselves for some righteous reason, give themselves to the Lord of Light, we'll say, they would be together. There would be a
remember,
statement.
They
wouldn't randomly set up, but randomly set them up too.
Yes, but remember, they did have a doomsday prophecy in their own worldview about themselves and their place in it. So they did believe that Babylon would come and destroy them, and their Messiah was basically leading them to their part in the history that would lead to the return of Christ and making everything right with the world, as it's stated in Revelation eventually. But they believed that they at first would be taken by Babylon. At that time, modern day Babylon for them was the United States of America.
Government. Yeah, absolutely.
So who knows if they did believe that eventually they were going to go down in fire anyway. I believe, here's what I think. I think many of the Branch Davidians did not leave because they had a devotion to Koresh and believed he was the Messiah. So they were going to listen to him more than they were going to listen to their fear or the FBI. I believe Koresh very possibly could have instructed someone or some ones to light those fires, because he was going to bring about his apocalyptic happening no matter what happened.
Possibly, yeah.
That's what I tend to believe occurred. But again, watch this Waco rules of engagement. Chuck Schumer, I didn't like him before. I always thought he was an obnoxious New Yorker. Like one of those obnoxious New York people with like the worst version of the accent possible. In this film, he is such a fucking dick and he's a liar. Mm-hmm. And you know what? At one point, one of the attorneys who was on the side of the Branch Davidians and the rights that were grievously violated here by the American government, when he was talking, he mentioned, well, Chuck Schumer brought some smart-ass snide thing up, and this guy says, well, I'll tell you why. And Chuck Schumer goes, okay, I'll let you tell me why. And it was just like, you could tell that the ego oozing out of his mouth, like the fucking power vampire that he was. And then to see Biden 30 years ago just saying the United States did not do this. Yeah. It's like, you can't believe a word what he fucking says either. They're the politicians at this level when they got to cover shit up are liars.
And they're going to, and they're all going to, that's the one time they're going to stick together. But do I think that it was done purposely or not? I don't know. I don't know if the people in that building killed themselves on purpose or not. I tend to lean towards no. And I also find it very interesting with David Koresh that when he allowed those children to leave, there was a point where he started letting people out.
Some.
Yeah, and only once. When he let them out, none of his children went. I found that to be very interesting when he kept his kids with him.
Well, and you got to think, for a megalomaniacal maniac like Koresh, mm-hmm. A megalomaniacal cult leader who fancied himself to be Christ, mm-hmm. He just sees everything in the world as a reflection of himself. So his children would be the ultimate reflections of himself. So if he's going to go, they're going to go too.
He's going to martyr them just like he's going to martyr himself. So that actually makes me fall into maybe it was planned. I don't know. But the interesting conversation is who was at fault here, right? That's what this cult usually comes down to. And I have I'm going to really shortly just say of the things that were recovered after the fires were out and they went into their
where did this come from again, Lee? I forget what you told me. Where did this the list come from that you're going to read off from?
Oh, okay.
Source.
I lost it again. It's actually renoforgovernor.com. But it says guns recovered at the Branch Davidian compound.
So this is clearly a pro-FBI list of what was recovered.
So this is actually a memorandum to the press issued by Chris Peacock, Treasury Department Director of Public Affairs, on July 13th, 1995.
Okay.
So this is where it came from. And it says, subject, weapons possessed by the Branch Davidians, and in total, the Texas Department of Public Safety, led by Texas Rangers, recovered more than 300 firearms from the Branch Davidian compound, in addition to a number of live grenades, and 300 grenade components were uncovered. Hundreds of thousands of rounds of ammunition were also seized. And then there's an actual list, and I'm not going to read them all.
What are the worst things on it?
But so machine guns. The FBI determined that 46 semi-automatic firearms had been modified to fire in full automatic mode. 22 M16 type rifles, 20 AK-47 type rifles, 2 Heckler and Koch SP-89, 2 M11-9. I don't know what guns, but those are what they found there. And then AR-15 had been modified to fire with a silencer, 21 sound suppressors, hand grenades, 4 live M21.
They believed also that they had modified a lot of the weapons to become fully automatic.
Yes. So that was hand grenades, I said. Firearms, 61 M16 types, 2 M16 lower receivers, 61 AK-47s, explosives, hand grenades, I said that, gunpowder, loose gunpowder, and lots of silencers, which I found to be crazy. We can post this if you
that
anyone
leads me to
wants
believe
to
that
read it.
maybe the idea was still to sell at the gun shows. Who knows what that equipment was there for, or
Exactly.
whatever. But real quick, since we are out of time for this week,
can I pose a question?
I was going to throw to you right now. So why don't you?
Knowing, let's say the FBI or government, whatever, knows that they have all these weapons, is that enough to warrant what they did?
So that's where I was going with. That was going to be my answer.
Like forget about the cult and the religious aspect and even the children being in danger. The fact that they had these seemingly illegal weapons
and military grade weapons, and they're modifying them to make them even,
which is
bigger
illegal.
and better.
Well, maybe not in Texas,
but
is that enough for the government to justify? That's just my question.
That's where I was going with my answer. And I'm going to surprise people. I think I hate guns. I don't think anybody should have them. I think they're stupid. However, it is the law of the land that you can have as many as you want. And
the FBI just can't come in for no reason.
Yeah,
and take them.
Well, hold on. But these weapons, are they allowed to have these weapons?
Yeah. Well, there is a point where it looks like what they went after them for.
You got people printing guns on 3D printers right now.
That's illegal, but that's illegal.
Well, I'm just saying, like you never know.
All I'm saying is I don't know the law. Maybe if someone wants to weigh in on this on social media, like what they had,
was that
legal?
A crime?
Yeah, was that crime enough for the FBI to go in?
I'm saying no. I'm saying absolutely not. You take away, like Sterner said in the beginning, the child bride thing. You take away the child bride. There's a reason that was there. There's a reason they went after that.
You didn't need that extra seasoning to do what they did. I think the figurative death warrants of the Branch Davidians were signed the day those 4 ATF agents were shot.
Absolutely.
There was no getting out of this in a pretty way. However, I think it's shameful that the government, when they should have had 400 to 500 men from all sides, swarm them with sheer numbers alone. They could have easily gotten Koresh out with limited casualties if they had hit it that hard. The execution from the ATF raid all the way to the massacre was the worst handled nightmare of government treatment of its own citizens I've ever seen, whether they deserved to all get arrested or not. And I think my final thing on Koresh is just that he was a madman. He was a megalomaniac. He also was a cult leader, and he changed these people's minds around to the point where they thought he was the son of God, and they would have done anything for him. But the FBI, the government, knowing that they were in this incredibly high pressure situation with people that believed they were in the apocalyptic times and believed every single thing that one guy said, the fact that you did not take into consideration how volatile that situation would have been both times you attacked, I just think the way they handled it, if they weren't looking for a violent conflict, I don't know what the fuck they were looking for, because that's what they were guaranteed to get.
Well, yeah, and this is also an example of why religion is stupid and why there should be no, this is an argument for all cults, I believe, argument against religion in any way, shape, or form. These extremists, they take people and they ruin their lives and that kind of thing. But the odd thing is, I think David Koresh and Jim Jones, those two, they believe their own bullshit because they were raised so religious that they actually, part of them, if not all of them, believed that they were the prophets that they thought they were because they were taught they could be.
But if Koresh thought he was a prophet, if Koresh thought he was a prophet, he also did not deny the human side of him and all the pleasure it wanted,
No.
and neither did Jim Jones by a long shot.
No.
So that's something to remember too. While I don't agree that religion is stupid or religious people are stupid, I do think everybody out there has to watch out for being brought under the spell of someone who does not have your best interests at heart, that's telling you things that are fantastical that you maybe even want to believe. You got to watch those people, because the charlatans are the bad part of anything like religion. The charlatans will turn it.
Listen, I've kept quiet this entire time, Greg. I agree with you to a point, but if you honestly believe that there is a big Sky Daddy out there,
stop stealing my Sky Daddy name.
Well, it works. Telling you that you are the best because you believe me and nobody else, you're stupid. You just are. If you need religion to morally guide you in a certain direction, okay, fine. I don't judge you for that. But if you believe that your religion is the only thing that matters in life, you are stupid. You just are. And let me just say something here. What we talked about, what you guys so amazingly laid out. Yeah, I believe that those people are stupid, and I believe that they're victims. However, this is undoubtedly a complete overreach by the American government, because I do believe that you have the freedom to be stupid, i.e., practice whatever religion you want.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
And, if there was a danger to the children, which Leah said that there was, the FBI and the ATF had every right to investigate these people and more. But a fucking tank?
Yeah.
Are you fucking kidding me?
Several tanks.
Several
helicopters.
Get the fuck out of here. Like,
go on YouTube if you haven't seen it. You can actually watch the Waco standoff. Just watch some of it.
On.
It's terrifying.
It really is. And, but that's what I have to say about it.
Mounts and Leah, what's your final take on Koresh? I mentioned I don't think religion is stupid. I hear what Jeff's saying. I just don't apply my observing of it in the same way that he does.
Again, I don't think religion is necessarily stupid. I think if you believe that your religion is the only thing in the world that guides, then you are stupid.
And
maybe ignorant to all other reasonable possibilities might be a better way to say that.
No. Stupid.
And
I will go with ignorant of all other reasonable possibilities. Go ahead, Leah.
You're playing
final.
It safe. Well, I'm telling
the truth as I see it, and so are you.
The evangelical sect, they are. I'm going to agree. They're just brainwashed and stupid. And some of them, a lot of them, it's not their fault that they're stupid because they're in a cult. And they were born into it. They don't know any better. So it's not their fault. They're not,
Disagree. Again, you're in a cult. You're kind of stupid if you fall for that shit.
All right. And I'm telling you, this is why I'm obsessed with cult leaders, because if they got me at certain points in my life, I'd totally be part of Jonestown.
And I would be calling you stupid.
So, and you wouldn't be wrong. My takeaway from Koresh, I find him fascinating. And I actually find him to be one. I mean, he definitely abused his power with women, and he was a definite dangerous man without a doubt. And he was a narcissist with a God complex that he just somehow figured out to express without looking like a lunatic.
Would you say he bears a significant responsibility for the deaths of his followers? I would. What would you say?
I say,
no doubt.
For the most of the people in that building, I'm not going to say he's totally responsible. For the children, it is completely his fault. He had his chance to let them all go. Even the women that were there with him, I don't know if they were allowed to leave or not. Free will.
And free will is a tricky thing when you think you're shacked up with God.
That's the thing about religion. You don't have free will. There is no such thing as free will when it comes to religion.
It is a tricky situation logically when you get to that point.
Guess what? You can do whatever you want, but if you do what you want, you're going to go to hell. Is that really free will? Nope.
Mounts, what do you think of the final analysis on Koresh and the what the government did?
Well, first I'd like to say that I believe that my religion is the one and only true religion that I
Right.
practice.
You have
And I don't consider that man a stupid guy.
so much free will, though.
Well, I guess it depends on how you look at it. But
Can you pick another religion?
can I? Sure.
Yeah, but will you go to hell?
No.
No, you absolutely will.
Oh,
That's
now
what, that's what Christianity
Well,
says.
that's somebody's interpretation of
That's-
Christianity,
yeah,
and I
it's
think
not-
it's
Yeah, that's
somebody
what
named
you
Jeff
think. I don't believe that.
A lot of Christians believe that.
But
yes, Jeff. But we're talking about Mounts' final take on Koresh.
I know,
here.
but we went to the same church. I like we grew up as Lutherans.
Right. But that's not what I believe.
Well, I know. Okay, that's fine. But Lutherans believe
in one God.
in one God, and if you believe in a different God, then you're going to hell.
That's not necessarily stated anywhere. And
Well,
they
it's
believe
stated in church.
Okay, but guys, this is not another religion episode, and we are running seriously low on time. So, Mounts' final take on Koresh.
I agree with everything you guys said about David Koresh.
What
Super
about the
intelligent, fascinating gentleman. Purely evil. I believe he's responsible for the deaths of everyone in that building.
Pure evil.
Along with the U.S. government, who definitely went overboard, whether that be for whatever means they wanted to see that come to an end. And it's, if you look at any official manuscript, it's blatantly laid out in there that they tried to resolve all wrongdoing on their part, which makes me think that there was definitely wrongdoing on their part.
Yep, they slaughtered their own people, slaughtered them.
Right.
A very sad, scary, dark tale that unfortunately happened in the bright sunlight of Waco, Texas, in 1993. A true nightmare of our human history, and I would say we have only scratched the surface of the unholy trinity of cults. Coming up the next 2 Tuesdays, I should say the next 2 Tuesday episodes when they air will
Waco
be
and Waco.
We're just going to do Waco. We're going to do Jonestown next, and then following that up, we're going to do the Manson family. So stay tuned as this series continues. Until that time, I do appreciate everyone listening to this and taking this very depressing ride through Mount Carmel and Waco with us. Jeff, who's getting the final fuck you, man? That's your territory.
Well, first of all, you're entitled to your own opinions, but you're not entitled to your own facts. Fuck you, David Koresh.
And fuck the FBI.
Yeah.
But back the blow.